Intuition gives us an opportunity to see outside of things that we might otherwise feel trapped by. It's like, what do you mean if I didn't have to start from here? Because I am starting from here. That's my experience. Well, what if you weren't limited by that? If experience is the name of the game for sensing, for intuition, it's patterning. Each of these functions provides something important and valuable. And if we're missing it, we're going to feel the effect of that.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So this was going to be a 2-part episode, but we just talk a lot. So we decided to break it into 4 parts. Part 2 out of 4, we're talking about, well, we use this analogy or metaphor of vitamin deficiencies in our bodies on the last episode. We unpack a lot to set up the frame on the last episode. So if you haven't heard episode 1, it's probably useful to hear that because we're not going to go back through all the preamble again. But we'll just quickly catch you up in case you're starting here. We're using that metaphor or the analogy of like when you have a muscle twitch or your eyelid twitches and you're like, oh, maybe I have a vitamin deficiency in my body. We're using that as an analogy to say there's other markers in your life. Maybe you have a personality deficiency. We don't mean like you have a bad personality or personality disorder. You have aspects of your personality maybe you're not attuned to. We all have certain things we're focused on in life and things we're not focused on in life. And this really gets down to the level of cognitive functions of personality. It goes away from just the 4-letter code, gets into the source material, how we learn information, how we make decisions, our mental processes that we use for that. And we're going through all 8 of the mental processes, and we're talking about them 2 at a time in maybe the deficiencies we have, because some of us just don't see these aspects of life or reality. And we're talking about how do you know if you maybe have a deficiency in this area of life, if you have a missing part or a blind spot or something that you need more of in your life. And so that's the framework. That's kind of the overarching. Anything else you need to mention about that, Antonia, to add clarity to the framework? The
analogy that we can bring over, because I think it's a very useful one, is this idea of, well, you asked me in the last podcast, do you ever get muscle twitches, right? Or Charlie horses? And I'm like, well, yeah, because I'm human, right? And you were mentioning that you learned at some point that if you're getting twitches and Charlie horses, you're probably low on a nutrient like, say, potassium, right? And so you got to go eat a banana. You got to go eat something with some potassium in it to help deal with that situation. Well, we have feedback mechanisms in life as well that tell us when we are missing one of these functions as a quote unquote nutrient. That there'll be feedback mechanisms and experiences that we'll have that say, you might need a little bit more of this thing over here.
Yeah.
It might not be as acute pain as a Charlie horse, right? Or a muscle cramp, but it might be something that does cause you to experience pain. In the last episode, we discussed the sensing functions, extroverted sensing or sensation, and introverted sensing or memory. And talked about how if you're missing extroverted sensing or sensation, you'll know it because you're lacking energy. It's a listlessness. It's a lack of joie de vivre or libido for life. It's a lack of freedom, right? And so you'll feel a little sort of low energy. You won't feel that sense of max aliveness. You won't feel that sense of flow.
Yeah.
And that's your Charlie horse that says, go get some extroverted sensing or sensation. If you're experiencing that with introverted sensing or memory, you're going to feel anxiety, a lack of peace of mind, a lack of continuity in your life, a lack of history, a lack of feeling grounded and rooted. And these are the symbols that you need a little bit more of that in your life. And so each of these functions, while they might not be our preferred function and they might not be our favorite thing to do, each of them provides something important and valuable. And if we're missing it, we're going to feel the effect of that.
So just in case you're like preferred function, cognitive function, mental process, extroverted, what are you talking about, Antonia? Maybe you're new to personality type and you're unaware or unfamiliar with the cognitive functions, or maybe you just need a brush up, a reminder of, oh yeah, I forget what those are again. What are those again? We have a resource for you. If you head over to personalityhacker.com/car model, it will talk about the car model we use to understand every one of the 16 personality types in the Myers-Briggs system is using 4 of these mental processes in a conscious way. Some you're uncertain about, some you're more certain about. And this will just give you some understanding of the framework of how we approach this. It's the mental wiring that is your personality, basically. It's why you have that 4-letter code that is your personality type. So that goes a layer deeper into the mental process of how we learn information and make decisions. And I would recommend, again, personalityhacker.com/car model to get up to speed on that framework.
Are you ready to move on to the intuitive functions?
Yes.
Okay.
So we talked a little bit about intuition and sensing before. We probably should draw a distinction and talk about intuition. Mm-hmm. But basically, as you listen along, what we want you to pay attention to is see if you can metaphorically look for that muscle cramp around these cognitive functions so you can identify, do I need more of this in my life? Am I missing some of this? Mm-hmm. And could I attune to it more? Yeah. So let's talk about maybe intuition in general.
So intuition, unlike sensing, if experience is the name of the game for sensing, for intuition, it's patterning. And it's basically simulating what an experience could be. So
like figuring it out.
Yeah. Well, without having to, it's like it's our ability to predict, it's our ability to see what's possible outside of what has, like, look, we're not locked into what we have already done. Yeah. We're not locked into what is available in the moment. We have a capacity to see outside of that. Imagine something bigger. Imagine something different. Maybe like either by running a simulation in our mind of what it might look like. So using our imagination to live out an experience we haven't already, we don't have a direct experience with or a memory of, or it's an ability to rearrange reality and ask questions that might even sound nonsensical in order to sort of disrupt the flow of what has, what we are currently familiar with.
Yeah.
So questions like, where would you go if you didn't have to start from here? And that's like a nonsensical question, but it gets our brain in a slightly different frame. Yeah. It forces us to imagine an alternative, maybe an alternative universe or an alternative modality. It's like, what do you mean if I didn't have to start from here? And because I am starting from here, that's my experience. That's my direct experience. It's like, well, what if you weren't limited by that? And so intuition gives us an opportunity to see outside of things that we might otherwise feel trapped by.
I like to see it as like an imagination process. We use our imagination a lot here. One of the easiest ways to see an application, although this is just one application of it, I mentioned this in the last episode, you watch a lot of murder mysteries, Antonia. Mm-hmm. And you're watching in a murder mystery when the investigator, the detective, the inspector is piecing together from random pieces of evidence, they can't be sure of what actually happened in the scene. They don't know in this crime scene what happened. They just see evidence left over of what happened. And then they piece together a narrative or a story of probably how this person was murdered or how the whole situation went down. That's them using their intuition. That's a really easy example for us to see, and we see it all the time in murder mysteries. Mm-hmm. So take that and now apply it to anything. Like, how do you use pieces and fragments to connect the dots that aren't actually connected? You're using your imagination to connect them. Yeah. Or a long timeline or simulation, you're doing the same. Mm-hmm. So there's two different versions of intuition, though, too. There's more of an outward expressed intuition, focused intuition, then there's an inward focused intuition. Let's talk about the extroverted version first. So extroverted intuition, we've nicknamed it exploration. This is the preferred perceiving functions of all NPs in the Myers-Briggs system.
Right.
So everybody has NP preferences is going to have this as a preferred function.
Yeah. And we are coming off of, I guess we didn't say this in this episode yet, but we are coming off of the heels of a 2-part series where we talked about how functions keep us safe and the thing that it prevents, like the bad stuff that the function can prevent. And the function of extroverted intuition or exploration prevents us from dead ends, basically. It prevents us from over-attaching to losing strategies and from not being able to problem solve when some creative thinking is necessary. So the function is designed to help us fairly quickly because it's an extroverted function. So that means it's being done in real time in the outside world. It's imagination and connecting the dots and seeing what isn't there in real time in the moment. And so what does that look like? Well, it usually looks like coming up with a lot of different possibilities. It's a matter of sort of opening your mind and seeing outside of like what is being offered to you. It's trying to get creative with those offerings in order to create like a new, like something new from what is known. And so inventiveness is usually associated with this function. And we call it exploration because it doesn't want to just stick with what it's been given. It wants to explore all the possibilities. It's like, well, like let's think outside. Think outside the box is a very extroverted intuition or exploration concept. And so brainstorming comes in here, idea generation, coming up with a lot of different possibilities, even if they're dumb, right? It's like coming up with lots of ideas, and it prevents us from being stuck, really, right?
Being too static.
Exactly. A word that we use to describe this function a lot of time too is disruption, right? Like disruptive technologies is very extroverted intuition or exploration. And we oftentimes demonize the idea of a disruption. We don't want to be disrupted, right? Like I'm focusing, don't disrupt me. Or I'm in the process of doing this thing, so don't disrupt me. But disruption, especially on a mass scale, like alters the nature of reality. We have a disruptive technology in our smartphones, right?
Yes.
And how do we know that it disrupted us? Well, because we were just never the same people afterward.
Yeah.
Right now, artificial intelligence and LLMs, large language models, things like ChatGPT and Grok and those kinds of things, these are disruptive technologies. They're going to alter how we experience reality. When androids come on the scene, these are disruptive technologies. So, but they're also technologies that can only have been invented if we didn't just stick with what we knew. These are technologies that forced us to think differently, think in a different way, to think outside of the reality that we have experienced up till now, and to see the possibilities of how things could be rolling out.
Yeah, I have this imagination that our ancestors were in, a forest at one point, and they'd been eating raw meat and surviving for a long time eating raw meat, and all of a sudden a forest fire breaks out. And now their meat got burned up in the fire. And somebody thought, well, what if I ate this? What would happen? And they ate it. And it was easier to digest. And it was like a whole new way. It was tasty. It was a whole new way of engaging with meat and food. And it changed the world. Like it changed humans forever. Like we were able to process more food quickly and our brains could get bigger. And so it changed everything. It was a disruption in the way that humans were probably living at the time that altered the course of history and how we evolved, most likely.
Yeah, or like that's an interesting looking mushroom. What happens when I eat that? And it's like, oh, now consciousness is born potentially, right?
So these ideas of like taking maybe things that were accidents, like nobody intended the forest fire to break out potentially, but now I've got a charred piece of meat. Let me taste this. What is it? Oh, this tastes pretty good. I seem to digest it fine. And now we cook our food, for example. So it's also responding a little bit to the disruptions that come and knowing when to tune into them and accept them for what they are and say, oh, I'm not going to push away a disruption. I'm going to actually see what's possible with this new way of being that's come to me, like the forest fire example.
Right, exactly. Like if, the other possibility could be that we ate that food and we went, and then just didn't do it again until another naturally occurring forest fire happened.
Sure.
Right. The fact that we were like, we should harness that, right? Like we should take it with us.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like, right? These are probably overly reductionist views of how humans evolved things at certain time periods. But you know what I mean? It's like, oh, we should probably do more of that, or that's an interesting response, or whatever. It's like you said, it's being attuned to these different, divergence from how we normally express, and then eventually those things become, introverted sensing or memory. Oh, that's just how we do it. But there had to have been a first time. And that first time was more of an extroverted intuition or exploration experience.
Yeah.
So then to go back to this idea of a vitamin, if it keeps us safe from losing strategies and dead ends, then how do we know that we're missing this as a nutrient? Well, one of the first symbols is pessimism. This is a very optimistic function. It's a function that thinks in terms of, how could it be better? Like, well, how could we change this to make a new thing? And if we don't see any possible way out, if we can't problem solve, if we can't think of new creative solutions, if we just find ourselves in a dead end after a dead end, and it almost feels fatalistic, we are definitely missing this nutrient from our lives.
Yeah, it carbonates hope and possibility in our lives. So it's an important function. So if we're feeling a little depressed or down, right? Like lack of possibility, maybe hopelessness is another one of these. What are some other qualities we can tune in and say, yeah, I'm probably deficient in this area?
Yeah. It also gives us a bit of courage to take risks. Extroverted sensor and sensation that we talked about in the last episode, that's also a function that gives us bravery, but it gives us bravery to take more physical risks or risks in experience. So I'm not sure if I've never gone skiing, but okay, I'll go try it and see what happens. Now, it doesn't mean you're guaranteed to work out, like you might twist your ankle or whatever, but it's the bravery to try. It's the bravery to go take the risk, the physical risk, to go, I don't know, like it sounds like they're having a fun party over there. I'm just going to sort of wander over and see what happens. And like, I met my best friend there or met my partner for life there, or like, it ended up being lame, so I kept moving on. It's like, but the extroverted sensing or sensation gives us bravery for experiences. Extroverted intuition or exploration gives us bravery for possibilities. It's a very entrepreneurial spirit inside of us oftentimes. It's the willingness to not just stay with the safe, but do something that you have absolutely no idea how it's going to turn out, but it just kind of feels right. It feels like this is the direction I should be going. It's the bravery to get up on stage and sell an idea to hundreds of people in an audience, or the willingness to quit your job and go try something new. It's a willingness to leave the country of your youth and go try to make a better life someplace. Like these are all this is the energy of the function. And so if we don't feel like we have any of these possibilities in front of us, if we feel like it's almost like the sensation of I guess I should just sit here and let the world happen to me, then you are definitely missing this as a nutrient.
One of the things I think of is the world we live in right now is filled with constant disruption. Mm-hmm. I mean, it feels like an invention hits the scene and then the upgraded version of that invention hits the next day, like the 2.0. And while that's being released, a new invention that makes the original one like irrelevant is invented the next day. It's just like constantly feels like I'm being like the substrate of my life and what I know to be true about technology is being eroded daily. I just can't keep track of it all. I mean, AI is developing at the time of this recording so fast. I can't keep track of it. Robotics is, like you mentioned earlier, on the scene. So I think this function is going to be important, like being able to tune into this energy field and see disruption for what it is, not get freaked out about it, but put it in its proper place, but also be excited about some of the possibilities that come. Like, we need this. And if I know anything from a Kia commercial, sometimes this isn't well applied. It's just like chaos for chaos sake, or right. A Geico commercial. Like they're just weird and trying to like break the frame for humor and advertising reason. But to that point, extroverted intuition or exploration is used in advertising. It's used in marketing. It's used in selling a new idea that someone can't actually experience directly, has never existed. It's the carbonation that says, well, what if this is possible, and kind of paints this picture. Like, what if we could go to Mars? What would it look like, right? What if we could go to the moon? What would it look like? What if we could, dive under the ocean and be able to like explore the depths? What would that look like? We can posit these hopeful, optimistic frameworks into society by asking these questions, and we can stimulate the creativity of somebody. I mean, somebody had to ask, how are we going to space first, right? How do we get into the stars? How do we get into the heavens? Like, that wasn't natural to our ancestors necessarily to think about building spaceships and going out into the outer realms of our atmosphere. Yeah. So these things come to humans, and I think we're in the part of humanity when people are going to get very scared and confused about this and may want to avoid it. Mm-hmm. And I would say it should be the opposite. Embrace this energy. Don't avoid it, because it's going to be here whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty valid point. I think we're a little waterlogged with this function when it comes to technology, and you can see how slow people are to adopt certain technologies. Like, I mean, how many people do I know that are really utilizing LLMs right now, like ChatGPT or Grok or whatever?
Never many.
Very few, and yet it's such a powerful tool. Well, what's the resistance? The resistance is that it takes a while for people to get used to things. And yet, how many iterations do we have of this tool that people might not have never used? And now we're up to like 4 point something, in its iteration with ChatGPT anyway. And it's improving all the time. Well, does that mean that people need to get on the stick and start doing this? It's like, well, maybe not necessarily. And there is something to be said for disruptions happening too quickly. Like, it's hard for the majority of people to roll with the punches as fast as life is asking us to.
Or a big disruption. Maybe not fast, but it's like, it's so pervasive. Like, I think COVID, the lockdowns and COVID was this
massive,
so disruptive that people lost a sense of time and themselves. And what year am I in again? Yeah. Like, it was really disorienting because it was so big and so full.
Yep.
in its effect.
Exactly.
I like the fact that people are throttling because it allows us to buy more crypto before the price goes up, before the rest of the world catches on. I'm like, no, don't catch on yet. I don't have enough to like pour millions in. I'm trying to chip away at buying more as I can.
Right.
So please don't get too excited about it yet. Like
Right.
someday in the future, wait till I buy a ton.
Yeah, and then it can explode.
Sure.
What I was thinking of, because we've talked about the potato chip version, this the meta or the analogy that's following us is the idea of if your body needs potassium, it will let you know and cramp with a leg cramp. And you can consume potassium in potato chips, but that's not exactly the nutrient dense way of getting this vitamin, right? Of getting this nutrient. And so what's the version of it for extroverted intuition or exploration? And I think it's subverting expectations. You talked about that Kia commercial. I mean, I don't know what
Geico and Kia.
I think Geico's a little bit more, I think they're a little less just chaos for its own sake.
Well, they're at least consistent for like the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I kind of know what's coming.
Yeah, I know what's going on.
But the dancing hamsters on the Kia car, I'm like, what is it? I don't understand the point of this.
Lots of flashing, lots of like weird things that are sort of juxtaposed.
For their own sake.
For their own sake. And that's the potato chip version of extroverted intuition or exploration. Like overwhelming somebody with a bunch of BS ideas or just wanting, like disrupting things for its own, just to kind of enjoy the chaos that ensues. These are potato chip versions. The nutrient dense version of it is to understand how you can radically change your life for the better. How you might have some limiting beliefs. You might have some things that are throttling you that are absolutely unnecessary. And there's an extraordinary iteration of your life waiting on the other side of maybe being bold enough to take some chances and take some risks. And so and it's also connecting the dots and understanding how concepts relate to each other and being willing to use systems to understand how things work and making connections other people don't make. I mean, we talk a lot about how that function helps us recognize when things are related that we otherwise would have missed. And just like when we discussed introverted sensing or memory as like you keep doing the same thing except expecting different results. Sometimes the lesson we're looking for is just to connect the dots between two things that seem like they don't have a relationship, but they actually do. There's a phrase that's called neurons that fire together, wire together, and they can be seemingly disparate concepts. They just happen to be firing at the same time. And now all of a sudden, these two things are connected in your mind, and they might not actually have a relationship to each other. It's like... like maybe every time I take this action, it just happened to be that one of my parents was really upset with me, right? And it might not be that they were upset about the action. It might be that when I took this action, I had a bad attitude, and I didn't understand that. So I connected their upsetness, their lack of approval, to the action when the action was perfectly fine. So now I'm throttling myself. I'm not taking that action anymore, even though maybe I should be, because I connected that I'm going to get paternal disapproval with this action, but really wasn't the action at all. It was the attitude that it was being carried with the action, and I didn't connect it to the attitude. So now I think this action's a bad action, and now I'm like limiting my capacity. I'm limiting my opportunities or potentials because I'm never supposed to do that thing because my brain just made an association. This function helps us understand some of those associations that we've made. Sometimes it helps us understand how we're connecting things, how we're like, oh, wait, these two things are related inside of me, right? Or inside of my mind. Or like I'm finding myself always, when I take this action, I'm always doing this thing. That's interesting. I guess I must be connecting them. And it's not just studying my own mind and my own psychology. It's like watching me behave in these ways. Yeah. It's watching me play it out in life and being aware, not just of the experience I'm having, but of like sort of a higher level of patterning in these experiences. What's actually going on? Why do I tend to do this and this at the same time? So it's an awareness of the connections that we're making and how sometimes we are connecting things inappropriately. And sometimes those things are throttling. And then it's the possibility thinking of like, well, it doesn't have to connect, or maybe I can connect it to something else. Maybe the system helps me understand how these different things sort of roll out in my life. And so I'm going to adopt a way of seeing things systemically. I'm going to understand like there's a bunch of nodes in a system and all these things are sort of connected. And if I can see like that broader picture, then the actions I take maybe don't have to be so, they don't have to be so, sort of working against my interests.
This is an abstract process. It's more abstract in relation to the sensing processes we talked about in the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
And we mentioned extroverted sensing sensation on the last episode being a source of energy. So if you feel low energy, it's counterintuitive, but activating the sensation process will actually self-generate energy. So if you have low energy, it's activating it, starts to build momentum. I would say that extroverted intuition, exploration, is like mental energy. Mm-hmm. Like it has like an analog to the sensation process in a physical way. This is a more mental, possibly emotional, definitely abstract and intuitive way. So I think if you're feeling low energy mentally, mm-hmm. or existentially, I mean, you have to map that to how you actually experience it if you're listening or watching right now. But I think this can generate mental and existential energy for you. As you're talking, and you're talking about this, because you and I, Antonia, have this as our preferred dominant driver process, extroverted intuition. And I could see your mentality. You were ramping up. You're getting more mental energy. Your words are coming faster. You're making more connections faster. Mm-hmm. Like the cycle times are increasing. Mm-hmm. You're feeling better. Your mentality's feeling better. You're probably boosting your own mood. Like you probably have more dopamine. Like there's a lot of things happening as you activate this. It makes you feel better. Mm-hmm. And I think it's available to everybody. I don't care what type you have. Like if it's not your preferred function, I think you can still tap into this and feel more mentally positive and more emotionally and abstract, intuitively positive, existentially positive. Right. In a very similar way to sensation.
Yeah, I think it's a great observation. It's moving into the unknown, trusting one's ability to iterate fast enough to catch up to whatever is happening, whatever is the end game on all of this, even if you can't predict it. So it's not so much predictive as it is having faith in one's ability to iterate towards the outcome. So that's one of the reasons why, I mean, if you listen to our podcast enough, you know that you probably caught the quirk. We end up maybe saying the same thing 2 or 3 times until we get it right. And that's an iterative process of extroverted intuition or exploration.
We give ourselves permission.
We do. We give ourselves total permission to just keep saying it until it's like, yeah, that landed the point. Yes, that's what it is. And it's a faith that as I start talking, my brain is going to be fast enough to give me the next word that will help me land the point and connect the concept. It's and I call it, or I think I've mentioned it multiple times in the past. It's like laying train tracks as the train is in motion. And it's a faith in that. It's like a comfort with and like heading out into the unknown. And I think that, to go all the way back to the fact that we live in a time period of a lot of disruptive technologies that can make us feel very
unmoored.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. And you said, I don't think it's avoiding this function. I think it's basically embracing it. And I think what needs to be embraced is a faith in the unknown, that it's going to work out, that we're going to pivot and move fast enough to be able to keep up with it to make it okay. Now, that doesn't always play out in the same way that extroverted sensing might encourage you to go take an action and have an experience that you're like, oh yeah, that was a mistake. Or, it's like any of the functions can encourage you to do things and you're like, I'm doing it in a healthy way and it doesn't work out. What does Jean-Luc Picard say? It's like, that is life. Sometimes things just don't work out, but they do more often than not. And this is a function that helps create or have some faith in the unknown to go, it works out more often than not. Most of the time it will.
And it's a function that can take the mistake or the bad result and weave that into the next possibility itself anyway.
Yeah, iterate on it.
Say, you know what? That didn't work, but let me take a piece of that and I'll see what's possible here. And you try again.
Yes.
Maybe a different way.
Yes.
So it's almost endlessly optimistic.
Yes.
It's endlessly SpongeBob.
That's right.
Just can't see a negative anywhere. Just constantly positive.
Not that Joel is saying that SpongeBob uses extroverted intuition. I don't think he's
necessarily a user. I'm just saying the attitude of SpongeBob.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we talked about anything else you want to land before we move over?
Yes. So how does one get more of it?
Yes.
Right?
Let's
Like,
talk about that.
What is your version of eating the avocado to get the potassium when it comes to this function? And the answer is being willing to play with concepts, being willing to ask yourself questions that almost feel nonsensical, but get you out of a way of thinking that you might be overly tied to. So brainstorming is a great one. Not everybody loves brainstorming. They feel like they're not fast enough to keep up with those concepts, but it doesn't have to be a rapid paced brainstorming session at work. It can be a conversation between two people and just go, what are the possibilities that I'm missing here? What are some of the things that I'm not taking into account? The other thing is, this is a function that sells ideas and sells itself. There's a marketing component to all of this. And so it's oftentimes seen in people's assumption that others are not listening to them. And so if you feel like, the two big occasions that I can think of when somebody's quote unquote missing this as a nutrient is, one, when you have a lot of social phobia. I think while that could be traced to other functions as well, having social phobias, I think one of the things that I track it to is a lack of faith in my ability to handle the conversation and show up and say the things I want to say, represent myself, sell myself, be charming, be charismatic, be somebody who always has conversation. Like this is the pressure that people who have social phobia oftentimes, like they worry about these things. Extroverted intuition or exploration just sort of encourages you to go do it. Like, do it anyway. See what happens. Maybe it will be horrific and you'll land on your face metaphorically and it will be an awkward, terrible situation. But I had an awkward social situation happen like 2 or 3 days ago, and I'm 47 years old. It just happens, right? But it's like, okay, but the next one might be better. I'll just iterate and test iterate. But what are you laughing about?
I'm like, when you talk about awkward situations, I'm like, people deal with awkward. I'm usually the one creating the awkward situation.
Yeah, you totally
so
are.
I just like, I like run toward them and manifest them on purpose.
Yeah, because
I just thought it was funny.
Entering the unknown social situation is sort of your
playground.
That's your playground, right? I have less of that than you do, but I definitely, it's like, I'll live. Did I live? I lived. I'm fine. We'll get to the other side.
Yeah.
But so when you're dealing with like social phobias, I think this is a nutrient that might be missing. What was the other one that popped up in my mind that frequently people experience? Talking to strangers, being willing to take those risks.
Sharing your opinion or your ideas, maybe like in a business meeting, I think.
Yes.
I kind of saw that's where you're headed.
Thank you. Yep, that was the other one. I've known people who, I remember a woman talking about how nobody at work listens to her, and she assumed it was because she was a woman. And I looked at the rest of the staff and I was like, I don't think it's because you're a woman, right? I don't think that's what's going on. I think it's because you are shy to sell your idea. This is a function that helps us sell our idea, sell ourselves, say things in an optimistic, positive, carbonated way. It gets people excited. It's contagious. And so if you're missing this nutrient, you might need to be around some contagious up energy, some optimistic for the future energy. And we can do that by asking ourselves, like, what's 10 different ways that I can solve this problem? I have a problem in my life. I keep trying to solve it. It keeps coming up. What are more creative ideas in order to solve this challenge? One of my favorite ways of getting into this function is to do like a multiverse exercise where I go, okay, what are 5 different, I'm going to choose a point of origin, a moment in my life, sometime in the past. And I'm going to ask myself, what are 5 different ways that it could have turned out that wasn't this timeline? Like, it's like a multiverse. What if I had taken this action? What if I had taken this action? And then I can think of myself, in all these different possible scenarios. And then when I bring it to now, I go, okay, what are the 5 different ways that my life could turn out, right? And so asking yourselves, again, these feel nonsensical sometimes, but they give your brain a way of exercising itself outside of the norm, right? It's like a way of thinking. It's like a gym. It's like, it's not really natural to do a pull down bar 20 times, right, at a certain weight, but how else are you going to get that muscle, stronger? And so this helps strengthen the muscle of possibility thinking.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about introverted intuition. We've nicknamed it perspectives. This is also an intuitive process using imagination a little differently than exploration. If we could say that exploration or extroverted intuition is about possibilities, what's possible, carbonating all the possibilities, I think we could say that perspectives or introverted intuition is more focused on the probabilities. What's probably going to happen? I don't know that either, but I'm going to speculate on the probability of this outcome. And it's a little bit more of a still process that takes a lot longer to develop, and it's a little more gentle. It can be disrupted pretty easily, and it needs caretaking to operate well. A lot of times just sensory overload can just disrupt this completely. So let's talk about more qualities of this, why it's needed, and then let's talk about how we can see if we have a deficiency in our life. And this is, by the way, a preferred function for all NJs in the Myers-Briggs system. Right. So NPs for exploration. This is NJs for perspectives.
Right. So it's an introverted function, and that means it's going to be more processing focused than action oriented. So you're processing intuition, you're processing your imagination. And when we talked about or discussed how it keeps us safe, one of the ways that it keeps us safe is by not being jerked around by like unpredictable outcomes or being on the receiving end of other people's sort of unspoken agendas, right? Because it's tuning into what's going on in the unseen realms, and that includes what hasn't been communicated, what's not obvious. There's a lot of corruption that can happen in unseen realms, like when people hide things, conspiracies, ways of going, like systems that get set up and we don't necessarily get to, have any transparency around them or whatever. We can be at the receiving end of quite a bit of pain. And this is the function that helps us tune into the sort of the world outside of the world that we're directly engaged with. It does that by running simulations. It runs simulations on how people are thinking. It runs simulations on how something can roll out. And that's why it's probability oriented. Because when you run a simulation, you're basically kind of like imagining reality or an experience you could be happening inside your brain where you don't have the same limitations of time. You don't have a limitation on having to directly experience it. You can just kind of like, what if I directly experienced it? What would that look like? And that gives it visioning capacity. It gives it predictive power. It gives it an ability to sort of understand, the hidden forces of our life. And so it also taps into meaning. It taps into narrative. It taps into paradigmatic thinking, right? Like, what is the paradigm that's going on here? Not just the content, but also the context. What is the substrate of thought? If I'm gonna really understand how this is gonna roll out into the future, if I'm gonna run a simulation, I need to make sure that I'm starting it out at a correct starting point, right? Like my initial conditions on the simulation are accurate or correct, or are tapping into things that might not be so obvious. Because if I start it out at a place that is just based on the obvious, well, then I'm going to predict what people want me to predict, right?
Yes.
If I just go based on the information that's given to me, then they get to control how I see it rolling out.
Yeah.
But if I see beyond what people are communicating to me, then I'm far more likely to see what's actually true and not just handing myself over to other people's agenda.
Well, I think you can see this. I think the best place to see this exhibited is in the legacy media that we've inherited from the 20th century. Mm-hmm. You can almost see a clear evolution where a reporter in 1955 is standing with a clipboard and writing down the factual elements of what happened in this scene. Like, okay, this person walked into the courthouse. They said this thing. They did. They're writing down turn by turn. They're reporting on an event of what happened. If you watch any news media now, legacy media, it's about the meaning of what happened, mm-hmm. not what happened. It's about the framing of it, the meaning we take from the event. We're not reporting on the direct event and letting people make up their own minds. Reporters, news media, people on video, written word, they're basically framing things in the headlines and the way they write about world events on how I should be thinking about it, how I should be seeing it, how I should be perceiving it. So in a way, this is kind of everywhere right now, but I don't know if people know that it's everywhere right now. We still have this assumption or a legacy of, it's a reporter. They're reporting the news and the facts, not their interpretation of the news and the facts. But most people, I think, see this now. Oh, that's what happened. But it's no longer just reporting on the facts. So I think we can see that there. I'm sure there's other places we can see it. So one way I could see it is if you're getting kind of taken. Like if you're being deceived, or you're just buying into wholesale narratives and not vetting those for yourself, and you're like, man, this doesn't feel like it's working right. Something's off. Like something's like, I don't understand what's going on. There's like a low level, a diffused feeling that you're not really seeing things more directly. You're seeing somebody's interpretation that's been fed to you about the thing.
Yeah.
And I think there is a challenge. If you can't navigate that world, you probably have a deficiency. So how do we know you have a deficiency? There, we can talk about it. But I think that's one place where I see people taking things at face value when that's not a direct thing. That's a meaning of a thing that you've been handed.
Yeah, it's unbelievably easy to be a pawn in the contemporary world.
Yeah, right? I'm sure it's happening to me too. I'm sure I'm not above it. I'm sure I'm like buying things, like the meaning somebody gives to me.
Yeah,
right?
And we were all given paradigmatic thoughts wholesale.
Sure.
You know, like the book I always hearken to is Language and Thought in Action, by S.I. Hayakawa, and it's effectively like the language that you learned, right? Which we have to learn language. I mean, if we don't, we become basically at a certain point, it's like almost impossible for us to learn it. So we have to get brainwashed into some language. And
language is meaning. It's symbolic meaning that we're applying to the sounds coming out of our face.
Well, that's exactly. And so we don't know how much the language we were taught to code things, right? Like all the meaning of these things, how much it actually both created the substrate and in some ways limits our ability to see outside of the paradigm of our language. Like we're kind of stuck in it. And then we can learn other languages, and you can get to a place where you're, you know, when this is one of the reasons why learning other languages can be so healthy, because it forces you to see not just a word differently, but the meaning underneath the word differently. And how like that whole people group codes things very, you know, like in a very distinctive way. And so we get sort of trapped in our narratives. We get sort of trapped in our meaning making and how we see things. And so introverted intuition is the function that helps us at least start diagnosing what that could be. Like, and again, it's not a judging function. So it's not necessarily saying good or bad. Oh, you coded this idea in this way, that's bad. You coded this idea in this way, that's good. It's not intended to give us a good or bad evaluation or judgment. It's intended for us to just be able to see it, take a meta perspective on it, and go, oh, I think I've been coding it this way. This is the meaning that I've been applying to things. So how do we know if we're missing it as a nutrient? Usually we experience a sense of foreboding, especially for the future. If we fear what's coming up in the future, if we fear we're being jerked around, if we fear that we're surrounded by conspiracies. And by the way, when I say that, I mean, I know somebody's going to take exception. I have ENTP preferences. Like, I don't talk about it much because I don't think it's that interesting on the podcast, but I'm like a total conspiracy theorist. There's some that are my favorites.
Tell us more, Antonia.
Yeah, no, I won't. But like, there are some things that I'm like, I've found myself going to bed at 3:00 in the morning because I've just gone down this massive rabbit hole of a conspiracy theory, right? And it's so fascinating and interesting to me. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that this is what's going on. I read this book. Somebody with INTP preferences recommended the book Chaos, which is about, Charles Manson and like how that might have been connected to, the CIA and the FBI. And like, I mean, I ate that book up so fast. So I love that stuff. So I'm not saying, like anybody who thinks in terms of conspiracies is, it's like has a mushy brain that can't think. I love conspiracies. But this idea that we are being constantly...
There's an agenda.
Yes. And unseen forces are always trying to, like control our personal lives. I mean, the one thing I do go away with going is oftentimes like, yeah, and nobody cares about me. Like I'm probably not being a part of these vast experiences because I'm not on a radar anywhere. Right. So it's like this sense of foreboding that something bigger is in control and it's malevolent and it's like trying to get you. Usually you need to tap into a little healthier version of introverted intuition.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could be something low level like demon possession. Like I feel like I'm being possessed. And, I think what we're really speaking to there is like archetypical possession, right? You're possessed by this archetypical energy. You've labeled maybe a demon or something like that. I think at the lowest levels, maybe in certain societies or cultures, that's where this could manifest in a very low level way. that they're contending with, all the way up to somebody that doesn't have any seeming meaning in their life because they're not tuning into any archetypical energy that means something to them. Like,
yes.
Well, how can I see myself? What kind of archetypes could I see myself through? Or what way could I see my life through? What kind of lens? What kind of framework? What kind of story am I saying about my life that could give me a bigger picture to like live in the midst of?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Being surrounded by foreboding and malevolent meaning, the other side of it, as you, I think, aptly point out, is not having any meaning at all, really. Like feeling like life is meaningless, not feeling like you have anything that has, I mean, on some level, I kind of force myself to think of like the universe being a friendly place that has my back. Am I right? I have absolutely no idea, but it's, there's like enough pieces of evidence that make me feel like as long as I'm on the right track, right? As long as I'm doing the right thing, I probably will be like maybe there's a law of the universe that makes it so that if you're on purpose, like the universe kind of helps, sort of grease the wheels or whatever. I mean, I don't know what I'm even saying, but I know that when I tap into that energy, I definitely feel more nourished. I feel more sort of spiritually alive. So foreboding, and on the other side is lacking meaning, maybe even lacking a sense of spirituality, is a symbol that you need more of this in your life.
So over applying meaning to things inappropriately, like I know people have done that to us on our show. They're like, well, you said that on the show because you're trying to use an NLP technique to get somebody to think this, and then that's because you wanted. I'm like, wow, it's pretty complicated. I didn't even think that. I just said the thing. Like they're like mapping out why I did what I did and applying all this meaning. We're pretty simple folk.
We don't really have a lot of agenda.
Like all this meaning to something. Like that's not at all what I was trying to do. But I see people do that. With like that politician said that because it's a dog whistle to say this thing to that group of this people that are going to do this. And I'm like, maybe.
Yeah.
So it's like over applying to every possible thing that happens. Right. It's like overarching meaning.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, it's like having nothing. It's vacuous there. So we could probably see, and we're using two extreme examples because this is a pretty abstract process. This mental function is not like, it's the least tangible, I think, of all of them. I would argue.
Yeah. Well,
as far as I feel,
it's a polarity opposite from the most tangible of extroverted sensing or sensation. Yeah. So it is a very difficult concept to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it helps us connect to some meaning that's bigger.
Yeah.
Right. Like an overarching meaning. And that could even just be like the meaning of your personal life. It doesn't even have to necessarily be like religious spirituality. It can just be, like sort of the meaning of my life and how I'm going to honor that, right? And tap into that.
An easy way to just kind of do a quick diagnostic of this to see if you need more in your life is the pace of your life. This will not show up if the pace of your life is too extreme. So in other words, you're going to have a low-level version of it if it has to show up quickly and do its work quickly. The longer space you give this, the more you can tune out sensory process, like literal deprivation of senses, the more this can activate. It's done in the quiet, still spaces of life. It's not an active, like, I'm at a party with thumping music and I'm going to have all these insights. It's going to have meditation and space and quiet and time to develop. So that's something you can see. Like, do I have space for this to evolve? Like, you can just see, do I have room for this to come out? It's abstract, so maybe I can't see it directly, but I can set up the conditions for me to have more of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that slow process of helping you make sense of the events in your life, or helping you anticipate what's coming next, or whatever. It's like these things, they emerge, they bubble up. When people have this as a strength, they almost always say like it bubbles up at a certain point, or it just kind of comes into sharp relief, but it's a slow process. And so it does take time.
So this is the function that we end our personality life path mentorship on. This is week number 8. We start with extroverted sensing, the other side of this polarity, sensation, because it's the present moment, the here and now. And we spend 8 weeks going through all the different functions. And we end with this one because it's the most esoteric. And it's the one that after you do all the work, the insights come at the end. Like they bubble up to the end. And so we spend time saying, okay, now that we've audited your life through the personality life path and you've looked at every single week, you've done exercises to test each one of these functions in your life, what is the meaning of your life? What's the story you're here to tell? What's the point of why you're on the planet? Like, what's the frame you're entering from? And I think it's a really beautiful way to end the program. And then we go into that 3-day live event, and then we tie it all together for the actual action plan with a system map of life. And it makes making that systems map so much easier when we end with the meaning part. Because it's hard to start with the meaning. It's like, what is the meaning of my life? I don't know, but we go through all those layers and it like works itself up to that. And we do that by design.
Yeah.
So I think to go easy on yourself, if you're hunting for this can take some time to emerge and bubble up. It's not something you can force, like make it happen right now.
Right.
It's going to be emergent, I think.
Yeah. Well, and but you can set up the circumstances. You can you can create circumstances that help it emerge. One of the easiest ways to see this on a day-to-day basis is like a shower thought. Mm-hmm. So why do shower thoughts happen? Why do we all of a sudden get hit with this like realization of something, or something bubbles to the surface? They're like, oh, hey, that's how that thing works. And the answer is because we're in a situation where our senses are being hypnotized. Warm water, like going over all of your body, is such a pleasurable but sort of insistent feeling that it allows our mind, like we don't have to pay attention to the situation, and our senses are not bored because they're being sort of massaged by warm water. It allows our brain to go wherever it wants to go. And then boop, all of a sudden you get this like, oh yeah, that's how that works, right? And that's a taste of introverted intuition. So if you need more of it in your life, then you create similar circumstances. So things like going to a float tank or a sensory deprivation tank, or turning down all of the, laying on your bed and turning down all the lights, and maybe having, if total silence and total sensory deprivation is like not, it just kind of is a little too much for you, because for some people it is. You could put on like really relaxing, pleasant, maybe meditation music or a meditation track or something to that effect. But effectively what it's doing is it's giving you time and space to be able to get into the deeper parts of your mind, the parts of your mind that are processing what's going on all the time, and it's sort of in the background, and now it can start to deliver some of those messages, some of the results of your brain trying to make sense of life. You just have to give it time and space to do so. And like to your point, Joel, most of us don't do that. Most of us do not have the time and space, or we don't give ourselves the time and space to really get the benefit of those imaginings.
Yeah. Okay. So I would recommend, again, if we're at the enrollment time for PLP, Personal Life Path, you should enroll, because we're going to dive deeper into these things, and we're going to help map it to your actual life, your actual personality in your lived experience right now, week to week. It's a very interesting, deep program. We go into shadow work too. I mean, it's a very, and not everybody's ready for that. It's a lot. It can be very, it can be so deep that some people aren't ready for that. So if you're not ready for that, I could also recommend go over to personalityhacker.com and get an owner's manual for your personality type, because we've got one for all the 16 types, and it will start talking about some of the things we've already laid the groundwork for. So if you have a personality that uses this as a strength, or even one of the uncertainty parts of yourself, you might want to tune into, how can I have more of this in my life? How can I balance this? How can I show up with these energies? And those owner's manuals will help you get started in that. So head over to personalityhacker.com. If PLP's open, I recommend enrolling if you have the opportunity. Man, is it a powerful program. If it's not, let's go ahead and start with an owner's manual for your type. And again, we've got more resources there, but those are just 2 starting points. And while you're at personalityhacker.com, under this episode, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment, ask a question, more importantly, share your story. We love stories. They're compressed experiences. It could show maybe how you've dealt with these energies in your life, moving through life, and the story of you and where you are right now in relation to all of these. We'd love to hear, get a conversation started directly below this episode. Make your voice heard.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or various Android platforms like Spotify. Actually, Spotify is not an Android platform, is it? It's like its own thing, right? I don't know how they work. I just know
it's a service.
It's a service.
You can subscribe anywhere you get podcasts.
That's right. Anywhere you want.
I think that's where I hear people say now.
That's right. Dealer's choice. Whatever you want. Anywhere you can get podcasts, you can subscribe to us, and you can also leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. That's the one that I read. And it lets us know that you're listening, right?
Yeah.
And that we're that we're doing a thing here, and it's having an effect. You can also, if you want to see it visually, we have a video podcast on YouTube, and you can head over there to Personality Hacker, and you can subscribe, and hit the bell so that you know when future episodes come out.
And next episode, we're going to get into the judging functions. We'll start into those on the next episode.
Thinking and feeling.
That's right. So my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast.